Friends, today's thematic subject matter that I have decided to speak in my this Ideas and Perception channel is a concept, subject matter of culture. The idea of culture and its perception from times immemorial till today. In general parlance, culture highlights in what way people interact their shared faith, values, customs while being in group, society, and organization. It also consists of language, religion, cuisine, social habits, arts, and traditions followed through from generation to generation. Importantly, cultures impacts and molds people's behavior, their worldview, and approach towards life. It is definitely a dynamic and evolving entity shaped by historical contexts, geography, while interacting with other cultures as well. Now, this is the general way in what one understand by the idea of culture. But it also consists of different aspects. There are different aspects of culture also, and it may be divided and categorized into three categories. One is material form, non-material form, and social institutions. In the material form of culture, we know as the tangible objects like architecture, tools, and clothing. A non-material form of culture, definitely we will call it as belief, values, norms, and languages, etc. And in the social institutions of culture, the structures that organize society, they are like family, religion, education, and political system. The perception of culture actually differs from society to society based on people's background, and their perception of culture are as follows. Now, it is one of the features of culture is ethnocentrism, where a particular society's belief in one's own culture is superior. There is cultural relativism, where the approach to understand culture encourages to understand culture from the other's perspective. And of course, the globalization also is one of the factors to understand the culture. That is the interdependence of the world and consequently thereof blending of culture while simultaneously eruption of cultured identity or culture identical crisis due to external influences. Now, the changing national culture is also a part of the concept of culture. What we call it as the that as culture is dynamic phenomena and evolves due to multifaceted factors such as technological innovations that transforms or transfers ways of communication and daily life of people. And there are other factors also, for example, that influence the culture in the present scenario is a migration and multiculturalism. That is blending of diverse cultures and periodic social movements such as civil rights, gender equality movements that reshaping cultural norms and values. So, in way, the understanding of culture and its perception requires acknowledging both its diversity and its fluidity. It is shaped by power dynamics, historical anomalies or historical features, and social interaction, highlighting the complexity of human societies. Now, now let us understand the journey of the idea of culture and its perception from ancient times till date. And The first aspect is what we call as the Asian societies, or what we call as Asian culture. Now, in the early civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, they evolved culture closely tied to survival, natural surroundings, cycles of seasons, etc. Nevertheless, we also find that the in the earliest times, what we call the ancient times of the culture, at that time it was visualized or conceptualized as a primitive and tribal societies. Now, early human societies were largely tribal, and culture was primarily based on survival, religion, and social structures. Culture in those societies was passed down orally through myths, rituals, and customs. Artifacts like cave paintings, tools, and mural sites give us a glimpse into the early human idea of culture, which was closely tied to nature, spirituality, and kinship systems. Now, during this the earliest civilization, for example, like Egyptian, Mesopotamia, and Indus Valley civilizations, the culture was, it became more complex as seen in the monumental architecture, for example, pyramids, ziggurats, written language, etc. And the centralized religious and political system was also one of the part of the culture at that point of time. Each of these civilizations had a strong cultural identity influenced by the gods, geography, and social structures. Interestingly, uh, the art culture and some systems during these civilizations they reflected cultural values. For example, the caste system in ancient India and the class structures in Greece and Rome were considered integral aspects of culture. So, in a way, during the ancient Greece and Roman time, they placed strong emphasis on philosophy, art, architecture, and literature, which became pillars of Western cultural development. The Greek culture emphasized the pursuit of knowledge, humanity, and the arts as reflected in the works of philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. Now, now let's come to this classical and medieval eras. During this period, the Greeks, Romans, and later European societies began to associate culture with intellectual pursuits like philosophy, art, and culture. And we may say that in this medieval period and during the Middle Ages, we may call it, culture in Europe was dominated by the church, and religion was central to daily life and worldview. Culture was largely expressed through religious art, Gothic architecture, and Christian philosophy. Now, if we see the other aspects of culture during this period, we find that we call it during this period we have some what we call we may define it as a cross-cultural interaction because it was due to the trade routes like the Silk Road facilitated cultural exchange between East and West. It resulted into the influence of Islamic, Chinese, and Indian cultures spread to Europe, demonstrating an early form of cultural globalization. Now, in the way we can call it that in the Islamic world during this period, this Islamic world, culture flourished during the medieval period, particularly in science, philosophy, mathematics, and the arts. Islamic culture was a blend of Arab, Persian, Greek, and Indian influence as well. Now, let us come to the period of Renaissance, which we call it humanism. That Renaissance period revived classical knowledge of reason, transformed the concept of culture, and marked a shift from purely religious interpretations to secular, human centered ones. And therefore, the Renaissance marked a rebirth of interest in classical Greek and Roman culture, emphasizing humanism, art, and science. There was a renewed focus on the individual secularism and artistic expression as well. Now, this period produced some of the greatest artists and thinkers in history, including Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Shakespeare. After this medieval and the Renaissance period, where we have also covered the Islamic period as well, let us come to the early modern period known as the 16th to 18th century. Now, let us see first the first stage was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment brought a shift in cultural values towards reason, scientific discovery, and skepticism of traditional authority, particularly in Europe, and it was characterized by the rise of secularism, democratic ideals, and an emphasis on education and intellectual freedom. Now, followed this, we have the period of what we call as the period of colonialism and cultural exchanges. Now, European exploration and colonialism in the 16th to the 18th centuries led to the mixing of cultures as European powers encountered African, Asian, and indigenous American societies. Now, it received during this period there was a emphasis on the classical understanding, transformed the concept of culture, and marked a shift from purely religious interpretation to secular or human-centered ones. Now, after this, we find the rise of the nation states or the concept of nation states in the 19th century. And the nation state, they shaped the culture along national symbols, lives, language, literature, and art became symbols of national identity. Now, during this, we call it now uh, industrialization, 19th century, and modernity now, 19th to say 20th century. Now, industrial revolution and the rise of mass media, for example, newspapers, radio, and later television, they transformed culture that could be widely disseminated. And the cultural movements in 19th century onward, 19th, 20th century onwards, centers various cultural movements such as Romanticism, Modernism, and Postmodernism that reshaped perception of society, art, and identity. Now, we find now uh, the modernism, the 20th century, the basic features you find in globalization and cultural modernism. Now, in the 20th century, in the early part of it, modernist movements and the era of modernist movements in art, literature, architecture, and philosophy challenged traditional norms and sought new ways of thinking and expression. Now, this was the era of Picasso, Virginia Woolf, and Freud, where culture was marked by experimentation, abstraction, and a break from classical forms. After Second World War, two, culture became globalized. The rise of the United States as a superpower also meant the global spread of American culture, particularly through film, music, and consumerism. Now let us come to the 20th, 21st century. 21st century, the basic features of culture, the components would be, I would like to identify as technology, multiculturalism, and identity issues. Now, globalization and digital culture in the 21st century is increasingly shaped by digital technology and social media. The internet was allowed for unprecedented cross cultural exchanges, making the world more interconnected, but also raising concerns about cultural homogenization. Globalized media, music, fashion, and art circulate widely, creating a blend of cultural influences. The uh, Another important aspect in the 21st century, in the real or the context of culture, we call it as cultural identity crisis and multiculturalism issues. The rise of globalization, issues of cultural identity, diversity, and inclusion have become central. Many societies are grappling with questions of national identity in a multicultural world, leading to debates on immigration, integration, and cultural preservation. Akin to this, along with this, there is issue of sustainability and culture preservation. Now, modern discussions of culture, it has involved sustainability and efforts to preserve both tangible and intangible cultural heritage in the face of environmental challenges, globalization, and modernization. Now, this issue of globalization, which I have dealt with, has a wide ramifications, and those ramifications we find that the cultural identity and inclusion is one of the very challenging aspects of culture in modern times. Today's idea of culture is more inclusive and fluid, recognizing diverse identities such as ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, etc., and emphasizing appreciation for varied traditions and life systems or styles. Most importantly, it would be stated that the concept of cultural appropriation has also become prominent, highlighting the importance of, of sensitivity and respect when engaging with other cultures. Now, in the end, in a nutshell, it may be stated that the journey and evolution of idea and perception of culture from ancient times till date, it evolved from communal sacred tradition to a global multifaceted phenomenon, illustrates that humanity changing values and the increasing complexity of human societies. Culture now is perceived as pluralistic and inclusive, continuously evolving with globalization, technology, and social movements. The emphasis on cross cultural exchanges and diversity that reflects interconnectedness and digital nature of the modern world. As such, we may say that culture is a rich tapestry woven from local traditions and global influences, constantly evolving but deeply rooted in its historical traditions. Thank you very much. I have tried to state the idea of culture and its perception from earliest times, and, and how it evolved, how it has been perceived, and what is the present scenario in the context of culture. And especially, I will like to influence and emphasize this point that cultural at the present world, it is rich tapestry woven from local traditions and global influences, constantly evolving but deeply rooted in its historical traditions. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much.